Hi, friend. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about midlife retirement, flexibility, budgets, money. We talk about all this stuff, but we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation today, Mike and I, about a new related subject. So let's dive right in. All right, Mike. When we talk about ideal life, we talk about what we did. And we did this accidentally. We kind of semi-retired in our 30s, your early 30s, my late 30s. And it was really kind of cool because we were still young, we have some money, we're doing fun things, we're living our ideal lives. And then I started to have some conversations with clients, with friends about them wanting to do some of the things like what we are doing in life earlier rather than later, but they don't want to like retire and never work again. So let's have a little bit of a conversation about this topic and see kind of like what sticks for some of our clients. So, what are some of the conversations or thoughts you've been having? And then let's introduce a little bit of this topic together.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited because if I go back to when quit my job and I started traveling, I assumed I was going to work again. I didn't know
Mm,
when, how, or what it was going to look like. And I also assumed I was going to spend more money than I have
mm.
in these last 9 years of traveling. Well, first, I didn't know it was going to be 9 years. We
Yeah.
originally just said, let's take a year off and see if we like it. And one, Ellen and I it was a new relationship, get to know each other. Do we even like this lifestyle? Living in a car versus an apartment or a house. There's a lot of things that you get to learn about yourself. And through that time, we learned, I guess it's obvious if we've been traveling for 9 years, that we really like traveling. Right? We've been in an RV for the last 3 or 4 years. Here in the US, it's just been a lot of fun to grow into that. And we have worked random jobs, contracting, seasonal, part time, and even full time. We went back to full time for a short period of time during the last 9 years, only for 1 year. And you get to figure out what you enjoy, right? What works in your house? What works for me? What works for my wife? What works for you? And you don't know until you try. I recently started rereading a book, and it said the lowest form or the least amount of information that you absorb is by reading, and the most you absorb is by doing. Right? And I always love the example Tony Robbins gives of there's only so many books you can read about swimming. You've got to jump in the pool. And that's what I think Jason and I are encouraging you to do is try out what does your ideal life look like? Right? Do you want to take 3 months off? Do you want to take 3 years off? Right? That's why we want to have this conversation today because we give you the tools to be able to prepare for that. One is getting organized with your money, and the other is defining what that ideal life looks like and trying that out.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking like we assume that everybody knows what our stories and what we did. So let's briefly go back just to kind of introduce like this concept of what you did and what I did when we say we retired in our 30s. Like everybody's like, "Whoa, that's really cool. How did you do that?" Right? And we can tell you how we did that. But just briefly, 30 seconds, go back and share like your journey of like what happened there. How did you do that? And then you're living your ideal life. What does that look like?
Sure. To keep it simple, it was simply quitting your job. That's a high level, simplistic answer. The biggest thing that I did was get out of debt. I had $200,000 saved in retirement, and I had $50,000 in my checking account that allowed me the confidence to quit my job and start traveling. Now, that was for me. Now, Elle, we were dating at the time, so we weren't married, and she had a very similar numbers to what I just gave. And as individuals, we came together to make our traveling lifestyle work. Now, did we get to do everything we wanted to do? No. Very few business class flights. Right? We got cheap accommodation. Right, that first year, we lived in a car, a rent, a tent, a rooftop tent. So we didn't even have rent. Occasional camping fees. right? So we were able to keep our expenses extremely low because at the time, before we quit, we had rent, we had bills, we had gas, we had all these other things that you do to work an office job. And so we just transferred those expenses into the new expenses. And it was much lower. If you just simply get rid of rent, man, covers most of our travel.
Yeah, and I guess my story, I mean, I was 37, 38, thinking about what I wanted to do on my own. I was in a toxic work environment, right? Like a lot of you are that are watching, right? We always talk about toxic work environments. It's not good for me. Wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I was kind of miserable, working 24/7, all the things. And I just needed to get out. But I didn't, by going from, my 65, $70,000 job to zero, I wouldn't have been able to do it, right? I didn't have millions in the bank. I didn't even have hundreds of thousands in the bank or in investments or anything like that. So it's like, okay, well, what do I need to do to sustain ourselves? Well, I have extreme talent in organizing and in budgeting and money management. So I could make every penny, fit with what we wanted to do. And then I would adjust, right? So we wouldn't be able to go out a bunch or we wouldn't be able to buy fancy stuff, but we could live. And so I was able to do that while I started building up my own business. So I semi-retired. Instead of full retired, I semi-retired because I was building my business. I was making a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, doing some side hustles, right? All the different things. And that's kind of how I started, where it's like, all right, I'm organized with my money enough and I have a superpower with budgeting. So I could make my wife's income plus the little bit of income I was making work. And we did it. But to Mike's point, that we have in common is we didn't have debt, right? If we
Mm-hmm.
had debt, or if we had a huge car payment, or if we had a big house, or if we had a mortgage, or any of those types of things, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I would have been slaving away at another corporate job just because I had to. But because I had that financial flexibility, I was able to completely quit my job, go to zero income, and then work my way there, doing side hustles here and there. And now I am 10 years later, and I've done a bunch of side hustles, but they're not consistent, and that's fine. But I'm loving my life. I work less than 10 hours a week. Like sometimes less than 5 hours a week. And I'm loving what I do. So I think that's some of those conversations when I tell people that. And Mike, you do the same thing with your people that you're in contact with. They're like, how did you do that? Like, how could you afford to live in your 30s and not have a full-time job or not even a half-time job? And I think that's why we're here to show you when we talk about living your ideal life, you have to know what that looks like. But to Mike's point earlier, you don't know how you're going to feel if you quit your job. And that's a little bit too risky for some of you to be like, yeah, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to go to zero income and I'll see if it works. That's too risky for some people. So we we have a system and a formula to help you get organized with your money so that you can have that freedom, flexibility. Those two F words are really important when it comes to living your ideal life. Because if you have freedom and you have flexibility, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like Mike just said a few minutes ago, you can take a few months off, or you can take a few years off, or you can semi retire forever, or you can take a decade off and maybe go back to work, maybe not, depending on what your situation is. But you don't even know. You don't know what your life is going to feel like. So that's why we're here to have this conversation a little bit and figure that out together. So, Mike, going back to now trusting this conversation to maybe unlock some of that. Whoa, is that possible for me, for any of the viewers out there? What is the first thing that they would need to do in order to like even go down this thought path?
One, listening to us tell our stories. That's the first one, right? Gather information, which is what you're doing. What is possible? And I think Jason and I are, I know we're on the same page of being debt free is the best decision if you want to live this life or if you want to live a life of corporate world. It doesn't matter. Being debt free is the best thing that you can do with your money because getting organized is about controlling what comes in, and that means less money going out. When you have no payments in the form of debt, that's less money going out. That's more money going towards future savings, retirements, these sabbaticals, right? These 3 months or 3 years off of work, you get the flexibility and the freedom to choose what to do with that extra money, which is exactly what Elle and I did. I told you I had 50 grand in the bank to be able to do this, start the travel back in 2017. And that year we did work for 7 weeks. So we picked up two different jobs, random jobs, very easily. One even found on Facebook, and we got paid for 7 weeks of work. One time we did 4 weeks, and then the next time we did 3 weeks. And each of that, like, so 7 weeks for me, 7 weeks for Elle, right? We weren't married at the time. That covered I think it was 85, 90% of our expenses that year, that 7 weeks of work. And the biggest thing was being organized and not having debt payments.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note as you're starting to think about like, what does this look like? How can I even do it? I don't know where to start. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why the ILMA exists. So we can help you with that. But as you start dipping your toe into the water, I would say like there's some emotional, mental things to go through, like to deal with, because the first thing you're going to run into is fear.
Mm.
Guaranteed. The first thing you're going to run into is, oh no, I'm not going to have enough money to pay my bills. Well, that's one of the reasons why we talk about if you don't have any debt, you have so much less stress. But the other thing that I was thinking through is, or the advice that I would have is make sure that you don't get into that like embarrassment and shame and guilt about what your lifestyle looks like to other people. Like Mike was just talking about, they were living in a camp, was it a camper van with a top tent?
A four-wheel drive and rooftop tent.
All right, four-wheel drive and a rooftop tent. To somebody who has a fancy house and a nice car and has quote unquote a good income, they're going to go over and look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, you must be poor because you're living in a, a 4x4 with a tent." Like that was a choice that you made because of what you wanted to do. But because you don't have that insecurity of what do other people think of my life, you were just enjoying your life. You were making choices based on what your income was, what your lifestyle you wanted to do, what you wanted to be, and all those things. If you have that insecurity, then you're constantly going to be like, well, this isn't doesn't look good. People are going to think that I'm broke or poor or all these other things. And then it's going to it's going to push me back into, well, maybe I just get a job. Maybe I just get a job. And then you get sucked into that rat race again on the treadmill, going, 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 just because of what somebody else might think about your lifestyle. And this took me forever. And this is why I can speak into this. It took me forever. When I first started my business, my first client, I booked for 2 hours and I charged for $80 an hour. So I made $160 that day. Hey, fantastic. But I didn't have another client booked until like 3 weeks later. So I made $160 in 3 weeks. And if I were in the whole like, well, I've got to, make sure that, I have a lot of income and a lot of clients and like my reputation was at stake. And I dealt with this. I was like, do people think that I'm just a failure? Do I think that I'm a failure? Like that's the other thing. Like you just gotta know where you're going, know what you want to do, make your choices based on your particular circumstances, and don't even worry about what other people are thinking. Don't worry about what your parents are gonna think. Don't worry about what your friends are gonna think. Like all of that stuff. You just live your ideal life. Don't live somebody else's ideal life. That's not fun. It's not fun at all. I dealt with that for years, trying to figure out, oh, well, what do I say about this? What do I say about that? And, it's just not a good idea to go in that space. So I would say you've got to focus on what you want to be doing. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I want to add to the fear is real and it's scary. I'm not a big, um, how should I say? No, I am a big proponent of this. What I want to say is your life before this decision of the dream of what your ideal life looks like, or the decision to quit your job, or whatever that thing is that you're thinking about through this conversation that you're listening to, is you can always go back to the way it was. You can go back to the same job. And if it's not the same company, you can find another job that's 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week, similar house, similar apartment, all the things can be the same. So when you quit and you go travel, in this example, you can come back and have everything the same. And usually it's better. You get a raise because you're not as stressed out because you just had 3 or 9 months of traveling overseas and no end date and everything is good. You still got money in the account. And what's kind of funny is your investments have continued to go up over that time period as well. At least that's what happened for Elle and I. And man, you realize the biggest thing that I think I learned was I didn't die, right? And because I didn't die, I can do even harder things, things that are even more uncomfortable, outside of my comfort zone. There's so many options out there when it comes to taking that first step when you are scared.
Have a different language on that concept, and I have to tell myself this all the time, but I try to remind all my clients the same way, is that everything can be temporary.
Mm.
Everything can be temporary. So when we talk about like, oh, you selling your car or selling your house or quitting your job or, living on the bare necessities for a little while to get out of debt, right? All these different things that we say to sacrifice, right? Any financial person will say, to sacrifice. It doesn't have to be forever. So I drove a beater car, right? Bunch of different beater cars while I was getting out of debt, a bunch of years ago. And it's all temporary. I don't have to drive a horrible car forever. I choose not to invest in fancy cars because I think cars are a big waste of money. But if you want a fancy car, that's fine. But you might have to sacrifice and drive a horrible car for a couple of years while you get out of debt, while you save money so that you don't have that car, five, six, $700 car payment for, 10 years and then do it over and over and over and over again. Like, but everything can be temporary. I mean, that's the thing. Like even moving, selling your house or, leaving that huge house and going down to a two-bedroom apartment for you or one-bedroom apartment or whatever can be temporary. Quitting your job can be temporary. If you don't like it and you're freaked out because of the money or whatever, like Nick just said, you can go back. If you have some skill and you have some impetus to actually like motivate yourself to get out of bed and go to work like you are right now, you can go get another job. I know the job markets are fluctuating. I know that there's some risk out there of, well, if I quit this good job, will this other job be available? There are things you can do. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands of ways to make money in this day and age. And there
Mhm.
are just more and more are popping up. You see them, you see the ads. Everybody can make money. Everybody can make money. But it's just a matter of you've got to find out how you can make money, right? With your skills, your talents, your abilities, your time, your flexibility, all that stuff. And we can help you with that. That's just the idea is everything can be temporary. Like you've got to try living your ideal life, figuring out what that looks like, and then being able to pivot. The only way you can do that though is if you give yourself a little bit of margin with time, with health, and with finances. Those are the three resources that you need. And in order to do that, you might need to sacrifice now for a little time in order to get set, put that foundation in place so that then you can go and take the 3 months off to try travel the world or take the 6 months off and do other things, take care of your family if they're, in crisis or whatever you want to do as your semi-retired ideal life, whatever. So those are the things I would say for sure.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is what I've noticed financially. I briefly just touched on like our net worth has continued to increase, like the investments have continued to go up in these last 9 years. And I've never had a year where I earned $0. It's been low, right? $20,000 for two people is kind of low. But if we're only spending $40,000, I only have to take, and I'm making 20, I only have to take 20 more additional in this example from investments to live my life, our life.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And we'll talk about this in future videos. We'll wrap this up now, but we'll talk about that in future videos of like how you actually go about doing this. Like, what do you need to do? And we talked about getting out of debt, getting on a budget, right? All of, starting to save and invest and all that stuff. What you sacrifice and what you don't. We'll talk about that in future videos. But I guess what we can do here is make sure that you're at ease with what you could make and spend. So if we'll wrap this up here in, if you have a side hustle, or if you have a small business, or if you have something that you can make in this example, right? Mike said he made $20,000 that year. I'm making $20,000 or $30,000 or $15,000 or $5,000, whatever the number is, that is going to help you offset some of those expenses. So if you reduce all of your expenses or a lot of your expenses and say, all right, bare bones, bottom line, this is how much I need. Let's just say it's $3,500 because you've cut kind of everything. $3,500 because you still have rent, you still have food, you still have gas for your car, right? All this stuff, insurance, all of these things cost $3,500. If you can make $1,000 a month, then you only have to have $2,500 in your savings or investments to pull from. If you can make $2,000, now you only need 1,500. Right? These are the things that you can think about. I don't have to make, or I don't have to pull all 3,500, right? You're talking about the whole year. If I take a year off, I'm going to have to, pull 40, 50, $60,000. Well, not really. Because if you get these little side hustles here and there, and you can make $500 here on that thing, and you can sell some stuff, and you can make $1,000 a month here, you're really not taking that much money from your investments or your savings. Like, but you have to know those numbers. If you don't know those numbers, then yeah, you're freaking out because you're like, oh, I just see my bank account going down and down and down. But if you calculate that out, say, all right, on average, I can make $1,000 a month from this side hustle. I'll pick up a few extra jobs here, maybe get another couple $1,000s throughout the year. And then I'm selling something and whatever. You calculate that out and you plan it and you say, okay, I can see where I can cover $50,000 for this year. And that's what my expenses are going to be. So I'm okay for this year. And then next year, I'm planning to go get that job. Don't think about like, oh my gosh, this is $50,000 every single year, and I'm not going to make any money. Like you're just taking from your investments. That's fear-based thinking. You got to try to avoid that. And we're not just saying go pay attention and just spend money. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actual planning so that you know what your expenses are and you know what your income could potentially be, and then you have a little bit of a difference and you need to plan for it. And then you try it.
Yeah, and I think that leads directly into what we have created. It's the ILMA budget and debt elimination course. So you can see that link below, however you're consuming this material. The ILMA budget and debt elimination course is going to help you get organized, exactly what Jason's talking about. Get rid of debt if you do have it. And we also touch about dreaming. What is your actual ideal life look like? So from this video, we want you to get organized, begin getting organized financially, and thinking and dreaming about what that ideal life or that gap year or whatever that is for you. What does that look like?
And then pay attention. We'll come out again. This is just a rough conversation, but we're going to come out with more and more stuff. And we'd love to see you inside of the ILMA as well for some accountability, community, more resources to help you start living your ideal life, get on the path to financial freedom, and get rid of the financial stress. All right. We'll see you on another video.